these seizures will never be experienced by the patient. So it is something that is happening in the neurons, in the cells, but it is something that is not perceived by the patient.
Today, learn about both the positive changes and sacrifices made when a child has a hemispherotomy, the short and long-term impacts, why on earth, despite a person still having excess electrical activity in one half of their brain, they are not experiencing epileptic seizures. Plus, we hear of research into further improving patient outcomes when they do have a hemispherotomy, all with expert specialist epileptologist Georgia Ramantani.
I'm Georgia, and I'm a pediatrician, pediatric neurologist, epileptologist, and I work in Switzerland, in Zurich, at the University Children's Hospital, and I have been working in epileptology and in the field, particularly of epilepsy surgery, for quite a few years now.
I've so many questions about the surgery called hemispherotomies. I imagine this is a kind of question, or these are questions that might be asked by a parent. Why is it worth my child, for instance, getting this type of surgery? And if you chop their brain in half, they might say, that sounds pretty severe. Is it going to be like they've had a stroke? Will they be able to use both sides of their brain?
This is really a good question, and the question that is asked by almost all parents, and it definitely depends on the situation of the child before surgery. So the usual candidate for this kind of surgery will have a hemiparesis.
Could you explain to people what that is, please?
So they wouldn't be able to move one side of their body. They wouldn't be able to move their arm and leg. And some of these children actually have had a stroke when they were little, so around birth, and they already have this this deficit, but they have grown with this deficit, so it's okay for them, and the deficit does not deteriorate after surgery in most cases. But then we have other cases where, let's say, children or even adolescents with some kind of progressive disease like Rasmussen encephalitis. They start having seizures at the age of 4, and when the seizures start, they have normal motor function. They're just normal children, and then the seizures start, and with every seizure, they start having an additional deficit, and they cannot speak very well, they cannot move their arm and leg very well, and they have this very frequent seizures. So in some cases, we have these children without a deficit that have not had a stroke, and we offer them surgery, which is the only way to stop the seizures, and in most cases also to stop the drugs. And we know that they go into surgery, they can move their arm and leg, and they have a normal vision, and on the day after surgery, they will not be able to move the arm and leg, and they will have they will see just part of the half of the visual field. And then the parents, but also the children, if they're old enough, they have to decide for this surgery, which makes it really quite dramatic, because it is a decision to acquire a deficit, and this is the price for stopping seizures.
It's like an exchange, isn't it?
Yes.
It's like, this isn't as severe, but before I had my temporal lobe surgery, I was told that, well, your memory is a bit rubbish anyway, but your memory possibly will be worse afterwards. Mm-hmm. But it's a trade-off, because my life expectancy was terrible and I was having all these seizures, but the seizures decreased in frequency afterwards. So it's just like that, I guess, is it?
Yes, but it's much more dramatic, because children that have this kind of seizures have, in some cases, hundreds of seizures per day. And I can clearly remember a case of a girl that was, I mean, not just a case, actually, many cases of children that were on the intensive care for several weeks until their surgery was planned and carried out. So they did not have a life. They just had seizures, and the surgery was just the end of this nightmare. But still, I mean, the price is in some cases can be quite high, and this speaks for the devastating nature of seizures and all that seizures cause. That families, I mean, parents decide that their child will not be able, they're usually able to walk again, although they have trouble at the beginning, but they decide to sacrifice the function of their children to get them seizure free.
Because it's still, I guess, overall, one hopes an improved quality of life. Despite the sacrifice, you're not having all of those seizures, and you can, and I imagine their cognitive function could improve as well, likely. Is that right?
Yes, of course. I mean, I go back to a short story, the brief story of a patient of mine who really loved to go riding, horse riding. So this was not just a hobby, it was her life. But then she got this very bad epilepsy, and then we offered her surgery, and she was completely normal. She could walk and talk and ride. And then after surgery, it was clear that she would not be able to ride again. So she spent the last days before surgery riding her horse and just doing all these things that she wouldn't be able to do after surgery. And then after surgery, she could not even walk for 4 months. She was in a wheelchair, and then she really managed to walk. And now she can of course walk, and she can take the bus and the tram, and she's completely independent. She has a job, and she has a life. I mean, she can go out with her friends. She can get a job. She can participate in the community, which she could not do. She could walk, but she could not participate in anything anymore. And even horseback riding, it was her own decision to continue doing it, but it was obviously very dangerous because she could have a seizure at any moment.
And falling off from that height, gosh, I can only imagine how dangerous that could be. Well, gosh, it makes me think of what happened, I believe, to Superman, Christopher Reeve, when he fell off a horse, didn't he? That was oh my goodness, that was just horrific. You told me before that this is asked by many parents, and I imagine some patients too. If you're going to separate both hemispheres of my brain, say, and in one hemisphere is where my seizures originate, how is chopping my brain in half going to stop the seizures from starting in the original part of one of the hemispheres? How can that stop it?
So what happens is that the operation, the surgery, is actually isolating this part of the brain which is generating seizures, like any kind of seizures. And it's not just about seizures that will engage also the other hemisphere. It's about any kind of seizures. So what is happening in this kind of surgery is that this part is isolated. It remains inside the skull, but it cannot communicate anymore with the rest of the brain, which is normal and healthy, and is taking over all kind of functions and can promote cognitive functioning, etc. And then you can stop seizures and have some recovery through the other part of the brain, which is not being attacked all the time by seizures.
But what stops the seizures from actually starting in that hemisphere?
They can still start.
Right.
The hemisphere sort of stays isolated.
Yeah.
We can think of the hemisphere as an island. No boats.
Right.
No connection to any other part, to the mainland. So everything remains on this island, but there is no connection, so we don't care about it. So still seizures are generated in this sick part of the brain, but they don't reach the rest.
So does that mean the patient will still have focal seizures?
Which only concern a part of the brain which has been disconnected, but does not. But the seizures will never be experienced by the patient. So it is something that is happening in the neurons, in the cells, but it is something that is not perceived by the patient.
That's so weird.
Does not lead to any kind of symptoms, of seizure symptoms.
Why?
It's very weird. Because it's just in there, but completely disconnected. It's like wireless.
That's so strange, because other people who haven't had this surgery and they have a focal seizure, we feel it. So why is it different for these patients?
We feel it because because it's somehow connected to other parts of our brain. But if it were not connected, if this seizure generator was just on its own, like in outer space, then it couldn't impact anything, any other function anymore.
So it's like the main channel of communication from these dangerous cells, a bit like, have you ever seen documentaries about these huge sort of group of wires that go under the ocean, and they're responsible for or partly responsible for, communications between continents?
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's kind of like chopping that in half, right? So you can't communicate with the rest of the world or the rest of the brain.
That's amazing. I also find it quite interesting because one of the a frequent question of pediatric neurologists that do EEGs on these patients is that they still, of course, see the epileptic activity over the part of the brain because, of course, it's still inside and it is still producing this activity. But since it is wireless, completely disconnected, it cannot impact anything anymore.
Yeah. So quickly tell people about a couple of papers that you have on this topic on hemispherotomies. So there's one already published and one in process. Is that right?
I have been working in the last couple of months on a big data set from several epilepsy centers. Part of this has been published before, and we decided to review the seizure outcomes. So just plainly, who is becoming seizure free? And how can we predict this outcome? How can we tell the parents that how high the chances are that their child will have no seizures anymore and can stop drugs? And now and this has been published in Epilepsy last month, and now we are looking at functional outcomes and cognitive outcomes. There are other important questions like will the child be able to walk after surgery? Will the child be able to talk? And another interesting part is will the child be able to keep some function on their paretic hand? So the hand that they are not that doesn't have so much function, will they be able to use it? And why it's important? For example, to ride a bicycle, because you need both hands for some activities. So we are trying to figure out through this analysis how high are the chances that the patients will really profit from surgery, not just in terms of stopping seizures, but also in terms of having a normal development in terms of walking, talking, using the hand, being in a better situation also cognitive-wise, because of course all of this is important for the next stage, for your education, for your vocation, whatever. So we are just looking at all these parameters in a big data set, and I'm really very glad that we started on it, and we have some interesting results, and I think there's definitely more to come in this direction.
Yeah, how exciting. Okay, great. Well, I look forward to reading that when that comes out. Everybody, keep your eyes open. Thank you again for joining us today. This is exciting stuff, and I hope to hear more from you in the future about the latest. This is brilliant. Thank you so much, Georgia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Georgia for going into so much detail for us regarding hemispherotomies, including the brilliant examples showing that lives are much improved with this surgery. It is all fascinating and really thought-provoking stuff.